Hello, my American Studies 340 students slash AFAM 350 students for critical race and education in the U.S. course. This is Professor Donald Earl Collins. It is week 3. Come to you from my humble abode. This possibly could be the last week I'll be doing recordings to summarize what we'll talk about in our classes for the rest of the semester. It might not be. I don't know, and we do live with this kind of uncertainty, and I do understand where a lot of you are coming from. I do believe that a good portion of folks in this course and folks in my other class, actually other classes, are feeling disaffected. They feel like if it's not online, it doesn't count. I had one student who, this is not criticism, it's just a fact, who just said that can't wait till classes start again, as if we haven't been in class these last few weeks because you are online. I've been, I teach at another university where a good portion of the courses are online, and most of the courses I've taught for them have been online, or been hybrid courses where they're a combination of online and in person. So I guess you're saying those degrees don't count. Those people who earn master's degrees and PhDs and bachelor's degrees and even associate degrees by taking some online classes, that doesn't really count. That's not really school. It's only school when you're in person. Well, I think that's a bad attitude to have, understanding fully as your professor, as someone who's felt disaffected to the point where I could possibly walk in one day and possibly resign, not necessarily from this job, but from one of my teaching jobs at least anyway. I do understand that the pressures of the pandemic, the NUI, the sense of depression and frustration and uncertainty is enough to wreak havoc on one's mental health. I understand that better than a lot of you probably would ever imagine. Um, Based on my own background, based on what I'm dealing with now, and so on and so forth. So I understand, but I also understand that, especially when you're online and not meeting people, you have to be more proactive. And just coming back into the classroom doesn't mean you get to rest. This kind of course is a discussion-based course. Instead of doing it for an hour, 10 minutes, like I've had it set up for the next couple of weeks through this week anyway. If we're starting to meet in person starting next week, we're going to be doing this for upwards of 2.5 hours, where it's mostly discussion. I'm not going to lecture our way through this course. We're going to discuss our way through these different issues and readings and audiovisual materials, etc. We're going to have exercises, small group exercises, in-person exercises, and lots and lots of discussion over the next, couple of weeks while you're doing your, big research projects. So the truth of the matter is I expect a lot, and in the process of doing that, we're going to be masked up. I will be wearing an N95 mask. I'll probably be wearing goggles the first couple of weeks because, I don't know what's in the air. I don't know, I don't, want to be in a room full of people who I can't guarantee with any certainty may or may not make me sick. And probably wearing gloves for the rest of the semester. So, and I will not be meeting with you after class for 20, 30 minutes afterward because, quite frankly, I want to be socially distant. I want to make sure that we're all okay. I want to make sure I'm okay and not spreading this stuff to my family. So, it still won't be the same. But so I want you to make the most of this course and make the most of the materials I'm providing for this course and make the most of the opportunity that you have to work on your own original, or semi-original research with a community-based component, right? Learning about other organizations, learn about nonprofits, learn about educational institutions and what they're trying to do to make education better, even if they can't because of the existing structures in education, make it so that, the matrix of racism, the lattice work of it, and all the other isms that come with it, filter through despite all the reforms, despite all the good intentions of people and so on. So I just want to make sure that it's clear that this is the course that you have. This is the course that you have, whether we're online for an hour a week or meeting in person for 2.5 hours a week. This is the course that you have, and the course that you have is one that because of the pandemic still presents challenges. So if I can't make you not be disaffected, I can't make you not feel a sense of loss or feel depressed. I can't not a miracle worker, right? But I can acknowledge the fact this exists and still say, yeah, I know this all exists, but we still have a course to get through, right? And I want you to get through it as best as you can. And one of the ways is to be more engaged, right? And so I want you all to be more engaged in the course, not just two or three or four people. So, starting this week, really, now that we're basically done with that drop. So, anyway. So this week, we're finishing up the whole thing around Eve Ewing's book, Ghost in the Schoolyard, talking about school closures and the larger context behind those school closures in terms of community that has been amazingly underserved by larger Chicago for the past 120 or so years, right? Black communities on the south side of Chicago, especially Bronzeville, right? This history of school, not just school closures, but you know, less access to the best resources within the school district that's supposed to have equal distribution of resources. But the squeaky wheels in the northwestern, and the northern sections of Chicago, which tend to be more white, are getting most of those resources. Well, they probably deserve some of those resources because they pay the most in taxes, some people would say. Well, that's a bunch of BS, right? The truth of the matter is, the folks that need the most resources are the folks who are lacking the most in resources, not the other way around. But that's not how our systems work, as we well know. And just saying that Rahm Emanuel's the worst, or Byrd, or any number of these other folks who are, running the district, or whether you're talking about Lightfoot, the current mayor, you know, they're all terrible. Well, I could say the same thing about Muriel Bowser. I could say the same thing about Adrian Finty when he was mayor. I could say the same thing of Michelle Rhee when she was the chancellor of D.C. Public Schools from 2007 to 2011. I could say that about Kaya Henderson, who took over after her, and I could say that about her. And we both went to the same high school. She graduated 2 years after I graduated from Mount Vernon High School. I'm supposed to be proud of this person because we went to high school together, and she ended up being superintendent, the chancellor of public schools for D.C. for like 5 or 6 years. But her policies are just as bad as Michelle Rhee's, and we can go on and on about this. But it's not just about how bad these people are, because not all of them have bad intentions. In fact, some of them have good intentions. But even if you have good intentions, this is one of the major themes of this course, really. No matter what your intentions are, if your intentions are sort of on the, for lack of a better way of putting it, you know, come with the socioeconomic and racial standing of someone who just looks at other people and go, well, these poor people need help, so let me come in and help them. Let's sort of save them. Then of course you're not really going to do anything, right? That's a very white savior kind of thing to have. Even if you're black, even if you're a black superintendent or chancellor, even if you're, in the case of Michelle Rhee, an Asian American chancellor, of a predominantly black and brown public school district. If you come in with that attitude, I guarantee you're not going to get anything done. And I also guarantee that even no matter how good your intentions are, that you will come in and do things that really belie your intentions. You might have some good intentions, but you're also trying to advance yourself. You have an ego. You have, predetermined that since these folks need help, here are the ways that we can help them. Oftentimes with experiments that you would never pull on a school in a private school that's predominantly white, or in a suburban white school district, maybe in around Cherry Hill, New Jersey, or New Trier in Illinois, or outside, in suburban Denver, Colorado. I forgot the name of the county, even though I've been there before, among other places that are predominantly white in their school districts, and yet somehow in private schools, and yet somehow we decide that the schools that need the most help should be experimented with, right? The key difference between the school districts that, are suburban and white, or private schools that are predominantly white, is they have resources, they have material benefits and resources that most public school districts do not have, right? Yet let's go into school. Let's go in and make teachers more accountable. Do all this extra teacher training so that teachers can be superheroes to their students and somehow get their grades to go up, get their test scores to go up, right? We expect that. We expect school districts to operate on the cheap. Why are we spending 20? Why are we spending $10,000 or $12,000 per child in a school district, or even 19,000 per child in a school district like Washington D.C.? It should be cheaper than that. No one says to private schools like the Langdon School or Georgetown Prep around here, or for that matter, Gonzaga or um, Sidwell Friends. Hey, we charge you 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, $50,000 a year for kids, and go, oh, that's too much. That's too much money per child. But we can say to the public school system, 20,000 or 15,000 is too much, especially when they have to take everybody. They have to take, they have to take students with disabilities. They can't say no to students who have severe disabilities, in terms of brain damage, learning disabilities, cerebral palsy, you know, brittle bones, you know, severe cognitive disabilities, and yet they have to take all of them. That's one of the reasons why schooling in public schools costs so much. There's one school, this is from 2015 data, so you could probably update it for 2022, but there's one school that was specifically for severely disabled students, right? That costs $112,000 per child to enroll in, to be part of. But the reason why it costs so much is that these no one else would take them. Private schools aren't going to take students with severe disabilities. Neither are public charter schools, who tend to be very selective about who they bring into their schools, right? So it's really the public good. And yet here we are in a situation where a mayor like Adrian Fenty comes in 2006, 2007, hires Michelle Rhee, and Michelle Rhee is immediately talking about closing schools and teacher accountability and the notion of teacher effectiveness, and using exams that are supposed to be diagnostic in nature as ways to weed out teachers, right? This is this isn't new. This happened in DC even before it hit Chicago. So everything that Eve Ewing talks about through ethnographic research, through interviewing people, right? That's basically her book in a nutshell. It's interviewing people, interviewing students, parents, teachers, other stakeholders about the impact of school closure and other related policies on their community, on their neighborhood. That schools are a gathering place. So when you close those schools, that's one less place for young people to gather and to learn, and to learn in terms not only academically, learn social skills, learn actual marketable skills, opportunities to meet up and break bread, and put beefs out, and so on and so forth, right? You get rid of that's a gigantic hole. It's like having teeth pulled, right? And no longer, and not replacing them with implants. By the way, I have had a molar gone on my left side since I was 20 years old. Hasn't been replaced, and it does have an impact on my mouth. It has an impact on how I eat. It has an impact on how I brush my teeth. It has an impact on my overall physical health. Actually, maybe I'd be a little bit healthier if I had an implant in here. Well, we could go over why I haven't gotten one. It's a long, long story, but point being that when you start uprooting community institutions, the communities that are already under resourced because of redlining, because of lower property values as a result of redlining, because of the refusal at the federal level, at the state level, at the county level in Cook County, and at the city level for the city of Chicago, to invest in those communities the same way they invest in communities on the north side of Chicago, on the Gold Coast of Chicago, and other parts of Chicago, right? So that's really week 3 in a nutshell, and it's really the theme of the course as a whole. If you really think about it, this whole course is really about dispelling the mythology that American education is supposed to be a meritocracy. It was never meant to be a meritocracy. It was never designed to be such, right? It wasn't supposed to be a meritocracy in a sense of leveling the playing field. It's supposed to be a place where you weed out people. You weed out dull-minded people. You weed out the morons. All the eugenics language of the early 20th century goes into this. And so for black migrants, well, on the one hand, they might have viewed public schools in Chicago's being much better than where they came from, where it's Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Arkansas, right? Which typically were the places they came from through the first period of black migration to Chicago in the 19 teens, 1920s, and early 1930s. The truth of the matter is those schools were designed to weed people out. Those schools have always been designed to weed people out because that's what they do. That's what they're the best at, is weeding people out. So keeping that in mind, when we talk about e-viewing, talking about school closures as just being another brick in the wall of doing these sorts of things, discriminating against African American kids, African American communities, African American parents, um, then and then looking at Michelle Reed, I want you to think about how Michelle Reed talks about parents, how Michelle Reed talks about teachers, how Michelle Reed talks about students versus how she talks about herself. And think about what that looks like in the context of corporate ed reformers and technocrats who really rely on data and solely on data as their guide for reform. Right? I want you to think about that in the context of that versus what Asa Hilliard talks about in his short article about African achievement. And he's using the term African because he's an Afrocentrist. And Afrocentrists are, they might use the term black, but they're really talking black/African in the sense of African Americans and their achievement, and talking about going back to the past and looking to the future. And his perspective is more about communalism, creating the community of resources whereby black students in and outside of the classroom are constantly learning, basically lifelong learning, not just learning in the classroom as a form of achievement. And I want you to contrast how he looks at educational achievement with what Perry talks about and with what Ewing talks about and how Michelle Reed, by contrast, talks about it, right? And so that's really the goal of this week. And so if you can't do all the reading, it would be nice if you could do all the reading. It would be wonderful if you could do all the reading. But at the very least, pick up one of the things. Finish the end of Ewing's book. Finish chapter 4 and the conclusion. Because, maybe you didn't, maybe you weren't that interested. Maybe you don't like knowing the educational history. Although if any of you ever want to become a teacher, you're going to need some of it, right? But look at look at the methodology that Ewing uses to try to do the same thing that the Frontline video actually does it in its own way, and contrast those two. And then look at what we've been talking about black achievement in the meantime, and how do you put that in public schools for black kids and black parents and brown kids and brown parents for that matter, right? How did you make that all work in a system in which it wasn't made to work? These are all the things to think about, not just for week 3, but for the first 3 weeks of the course. And then finally, you also have your first reflection due at the end of the week. I have no idea what reflections are going to look like based on what I think in terms of the pulse of where students are for this course so far. I imagine a lot of you could say that this course is, quite frankly, effing boring, right? And I haven't really learned anything, and you haven't really taught us how to make these connections and all this other stuff, or even taught us how to read for the argument in this book, even though the book is, 166 pages. And be honest with you, Eve Ewing makes her entire argument in the first 14 pages. Her argument's there. She's just giving you a groundswell of evidence throughout the rest of the book, and she has a methodology section that takes up about 10 or 12 pages. Right between the two of those, you wouldn't have to read the rest of the book. So, really, to me, the main theme for you was to just be engaged. To read this, understand that what we're seeing now in terms of schools being open no matter what. They're responding to middle class white concerns about schools not being open. They're not responding to black ones, right? And even Ewing sort of says the same thing regarding school closures in Chicago. It's fairly evident in the other things you read that they're not listening to black educators, they're not listening to black parents, they sure as heck aren't listening to black students. So when we talk about critical perspectives on race and education in America or in the U.S., the perspectives that you don't hear from are the ones that we're actually talking about for once. And so I want you to be able to respond to all of that, not just this week, but throughout the semester.